Hello, everyone, and welcome to Book Talk, a perfect offering stories of trauma and transformation. My name is Christian Mehta, and I am the AVP of Engagement at our university. We are really excited about this webinar series for alumni and friends, and we can't wait to hear about this incredible book. Before I introduce our moderator and speakers, I want to pay my respects to the Indigenous peoples, elders, and ancestors who stewarded and cared for the nature and people who lived on the land where our university is located today. At the university, we have made important commitments to reconciliation, and I invite you to learn more about this work online and in person next time we can get together on campus. So a couple of quick reminders. One, this session is being recorded, so you can rewatch it and share it with anyone. And two, if you have a question for today's speakers, please type it into the Q&A feature on Zoom, and we will do our best to get to them. We are also excited to offer a book giveaway as part of this event. If you've registered online and are here today, you are eligible to win a free copy. So if you are selected as a lucky winner, a member of our team will contact you with details on how to redeem your prize. Proceeds from the book are being donated to support students in their training at the Impact Lab here at our university. The Impact Lab investigates methods to prevent, assess, and care for trauma. And to learn more about the lab, please visit their website. We're going to drop the URL into the chat so you can do so. Now, I'm delighted to introduce our moderator for today's book talk, Suzanne Heft. After over 20 years in the not-for-profit sector, Suzanne has been at our university for the last 7 years, where she is presently the Director of Development of Principal Grit Strategy. Together with her late husband, Harold Heft, and friend and writer Peter O'Brien, she is a co-editor of A Perfect Offering. She is the mother of 2 sons and a passionate believer in the power of story. Welcome, Suzanne. Dr. Jules Koostachin is an Innu Esqueo and a band member of the Attawapiskat First Nation. She is a published writer, performance artist, academic, award-winning filmmaker, and an alumni of our university's documentary media master's program. Jules also actively works with Indigenous communities, supporting women and children who face barriers. Hello, Jules. And Marina Nemat is an internationally best-selling author and educator. Her memoir, Prisoner of Tehran, documents the 2 years she spent as a political prisoner in Iran. Marina is a recipient of numerous awards, including the inaugural Human Dignity Award from the European Parliament, and serves on several boards, including the International Council of the Human Rights Foundation. Welcome, Marina. I can't wait for this discussion. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Suzanne to get us started.
Thank you so much, Christian, and thank you to Ryerson for hosting us today. I thought I'd start by just giving all of you a bit of an overview of this book. So A Perfect Offering is a collection of 30 real-life stories by people who have had firsthand experience of trauma and the way in which that trauma has shaped their lives. And the stories are brave and beautiful. The book began as a project of my husband, Harold Heft, and our friend and writer, Peter O'Brien. In winter of 2014, my husband was diagnosed with a brain tumor at the age of 49, and he faced a diagnosis that he would certainly not live to see his 2 young children grow up. And Peter, his friend, had lost his own father at the age of 2. And together they had many conversations about the existential questions of life. And as a writer, Harold had looked to books for answers to questions all his life. And although there were many books of personal memoir of people dealing with loss and trauma, he found no collections of stories that would reflect a diverse range of human experience. So he decided to work on this project with Peter. And so the book, as it exists now, is contained very rich and varied autobiography. There are stories about war, about imprisonment, the aftermath of physical and sexual violence. There are a beautiful series of photo essays by the Pulitzer Prize-winning photojournalist Paul Watson. that depict stories of children who have been traumatized by war in places like Afghanistan and Sudan. There are stories about parents who are grieving the tragic loss of their children's early deaths. There are poems about cancer diagnoses. And there's a stunning piece by a woman whose name is Jennifer Finney Boylan. She's a writer for the New York Times who writes about her experience as a transgender woman. And the collection is tough. It's a tough read and it's compelling. And for me personally, made more compelling by the fact that my husband passed away in 2015 and in the middle of the manuscript. So after his death, I took up sort of where he left off, and together with the help of Peter, who's an accomplished writer and editor, we completed the manuscript and the book was published last year. And Marina Nemat and Jules Koostachin are two of the essayists and writers who have made a contribution to the book. And I believe they probably share, as Harold certainly did, a belief that storytelling is a way of understanding some of the very dark and difficult parts of being human. So I'm going to start here and ask each of you, Jules and Christina, first to tell us briefly about your story in the book, your story, your personal story, what it has meant to you to share it. So I'll start with you, Marina, and then Jules.
Well, my story is about getting together with one of my cellmates, whom I had not seen since we were both released from Evin prison in Tehran when we were in our teens. So this is like 25 years later. She just sent me a message and she was in Iran and she said, I'm coming to Canada to see you. So this was the very first time that I was going to be face to face after such a long time to talk about what happened, to talk about our friends who are buried in mass graves. And I had no idea what to expect. And it was the most terrifying and at the same time, the most rewarding experience I have ever had.
Thank you. Jules?
I wrote about being the daughter of a residential school warrior. My mother went to residential school for 11 years of her life. She went to St. Anne's Residential School in Northern Ontario, or what is now called Northern Ontario. And I was actually at Ryerson when the apology happened. And I remember sneaking away from class and going, I don't even know if that restaurant's still there. I haven't been in Toronto in a long time, but there was a little Japanese restaurant, I think, across the street. And I went there and I asked him if I could change the channel and then watch the apology. And I was just kind of astonished that the world didn't stop. Everybody was kind of still doing their thing. And I was standing there by myself, and not that the apology really meant anything for me, but it was more of an affirmation. So I think just the memories of my mom telling me all these stories and just feeling disbelief that she survived all that tragedy and abuse. That's my chapter. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. They're extraordinary stories, both of them, unique and very, very wrenching and compelling. My next question is really kind of starts with a reflection. So when Peter and I were putting this book together, many of the writers that we were working with expressed that their own personal expression of their story, their loss, their experience, contributed in some way to sort of the forward momentum of their life, and had an impact. The telling of the story had an impact. And there's a famous line by the great writer, the late great writer, Joan Didion, who was asked, she was asked, why does she write? And she said, I write so that I can find out what I'm thinking. And I think when we write about trauma, we write about what we're feeling. And there's something very sort of transformational that can happen when we do that. So my question to you both is this, and let's start again with Marina answering first, and then Jules. Is writing about trauma a means to have agency over it? Or is it catharsis? Or is it both?
Well, one thing is for sure, a lot of times I teach creative writing, I teach memoir writing, and my students, a lot of them come into my class and they're looking for closure or they're looking for healing. And I always tell them, there is no such thing. Closure is the most stupid word in the English dictionary. You cannot close trauma, put it in a box, and then live happily ever after. It just doesn't work that way. To me, I have post-traumatic stress disorder, and to me, it's all about management. So, therapy, medication, a dog, whatever might help you, these are all management tools. And for me, definitely writing is a management tool. So what it has done for me is that it has helped me face what happened. So I always wanted the world to acknowledge what happened to us. There are mass graves in Iran that have not been opened. Nobody even talks about them because the government in Iran remains very similar to the people who put me and my friends in prison. So there has been no apology. It just keeps going, and it just keeps killing and destroying. So I always wanted the world to acknowledge what happened to us, and it didn't come. It didn't come. At some point, I realized that, wait a second, I have to acknowledge what happened first before I expect the world to do that. So my writing is my way to acknowledge what happened to me and to my friends, to those who are dead and cannot speak for themselves. And my teaching, I guess, it does the same, but it does it for others.
Great, thank you. That's a wonderful observation, and thank you for answering. Jules, how about you?
I don't, it's a hard question because I think, like Marina is talking about, it's something that you live with and try to manage. And I don't think here on Turtle Island, we have even kind of scratched the surface in terms of the intergenerational trauma and being the child of residential school survivors, because that comes with its, that's a whole other process, right, to unpack. I think for me, and I just want to go back a little bit, my mom used to tell me these horrific stories when I was a child. And I remember bringing them up and trying to talk about residential school and, in the classroom, and, the educators did not know what I was talking about. So it was like Canada's dark secret. So I just felt like really afraid to talk to my mom because I knew that she was going to share these stories. And in a way right now, I feel like her trauma is mine. There's no separation. I don't know who I am without her story because it's been a big part of my life since childhood, and I'm in this new phase of my life and I'm trying to figure out who I am without that weight. And then I have children too, right? I want my children to soar. We soared before colonization. Like, these are our lands. We're healthy and happy, and all this tragedy. So that's what I want for my children. And I think it's through my film work that I'm able to process and share my narrative and share my mother's narrative in the safest way possible. So, yeah.
Jules, if I may just add something here, forgive me because, again, my experience with trauma is extensive, and I also have children, 2 boys. And, I think I really strongly believe that we can soar with the trauma. It's not, I always see the trauma as a backpack filled with rocks glued to my back. And I realize I cannot put it down. The thing is, I have learned to carry it well. I have learned to carry it with my head up, because what happened to me and what happened to you and to your mother, it wasn't our fault. And that is a fact. And I think it is so important, to remember that, even though, there were those who tried to point the finger at me and to say, well, if you weren't a loudmouth and you hadn't spoken against the government, well, you wouldn't have ended up here if you just kept your head down, that sort of thing. But that doesn't fly with me anymore. And I really believe that we can. And that's the beauty of it, because sometimes we think because we had trauma, we cannot fly, but we can. We definitely can.
That's so beautiful. Yeah, I think, for many people with a traumatic experience, life sort of becomes divided into a before and after. For many people, that's not maybe the case for you, Jules, because you're sort of, your identity, your identity from birth is so influenced by that of your mother and your people. But I think that idea of, there's no healing, I agree with that. And the trouble is how to integrate the trauma and to move forward, to not be consumed by it. That's certainly, I think, something that a number of people can understand in the era that we're living in this time of pandemic, where we grieve so much loss. We're all struggling with a little bit of, we're not going back to the way life was. We're going to move forward into a new way of being with everything that we've experienced. In some ways, that's sort of a metaphor for the time that we're living in. And I was asked once by an interviewer if this was a difficult book to bring out, because the book was published last year in the middle of this pandemic. And I actually answered honestly, and I stand by what I said, that actually it's a very timely book for this era that we're living in, because we do need each other and we do need to talk about what we're collectively experiencing. And I do think there is some way of moving forward when we share. My next question for you is a little bit, I'm not a therapist and I don't have clinical psychology training, but there is much work in modern clinical psychology about this idea of post-traumatic growth, the idea that, out of the ashes of trauma, not all of us, but some of us do emerge with a sense of deeper wisdom or compassion or empathy for our fellow human beings and for others. And I'm wondering if this makes sense to you, or if it's sort of, if it's not an idea that bears any impact in your own personal experience. I'm wondering if you can reflect on that. Maybe Jules, you can talk a little bit about that. If it's something that you would say resonates with you as a person writing from your particular standpoint.
I think it's a very challenging time right now here in what is now called Canada, because of truth and reconciliation and colonialism. And, I feel like there's still a lot of work to be done, and how, truth needs to be told, especially recently with the 215. So I feel like there was a lot of progress in our healing, and then we took a few steps back with, the discovery of the children. And now we're going across Turtle Island and there's more work to be done. So I just feel like I'm trying to be hopeful. I do have a counselor. I do my medicines. I go to ceremony. I do as much as I possibly can. I spend a lot of time with my mom. And I'm also working on a film right now called Wapake, called Tomorrow, with the National Film Board. And it's about hope. And how do we find hope in these dire times? And how do we provide the opportunity for people to share their truths? And raw truths as well. That is hard for a lot of settler Canadians to hear, but it's time, it's timely. So I feel like there's still a lot I need to do. I feel like I've done quite a bit in terms of my healing, but there's a long road ahead, but I have a lot of life to live, so thank you.
Yes, you do. Marina, do you have any thoughts on that? Do you want to add anything to what Jules has said?
Well, to me, now I'm past the stage of having told my story. So that's been done. And what I think, what I experienced, because it happened, I went to prison when I was a teenager, when I was between 16 to 18 years old. So it kind of feels like the experience has been with me all of my life. And this experience turned me into a writer and a public speaker. I mean, not in a gazillion years, if this had not happened to me, I mean, I cannot see myself coming down this route. I mean, I would have been a completely different person. Better or worse, I don't know. But when I think about it, and I think, because I was a child before this happened, but nevertheless, I was a brat. So, honestly, I really think I'm a better person than I would have been if this had not happened. I'm certainly rough around the edges. Okay, don't get me wrong. Some people might even see me as harsh because I'm not exactly an optimist, but at the same time, I understand suffering and I understand how to deal with it. And as people who are alive, we suffer. we suffer from various things constantly, and it is good to know how to handle that sort of thing. So I find that, what has helped me after telling my story is to embrace this passion that I have discovered as a result, which is writing. And I believe that literature can carry the human soul. And I feel like this gift has been given to me, even though I didn't want it at all. But it was kind of shoved into my arms, and life said, hey, you have this gift, so you better go and use it. And I find it so important to use your gifts. So for me right now, my passion is writing. My passion is teaching. And even though I live with that grief of what happened and the people who I lost and the people who are dying under torture even today, I still believe that I have joy in my life, and my joy is hard earned. And it is a very three-dimensional joy in the sense that I get joy from what I'm passionate about. From my writing, I get joy from teaching. And I'm happy about that. So I think if of our people can say that I'm capable of being happy, not 24/7, by the way, but, I'm sometimes happy, that means that anybody can be happy. And that's a good thing.
Absolutely. There's so much agency in what you've just said. And I think, my husband used to say there's no cure for being human. And to be human is to embrace the dark and the light. People ask me often why the book is called A Perfect Offering. And somebody's entered a question into the chat asking if the book is available to purchase. It certainly is. You can buy it from any independent bookseller, from Amazon, from Indigo, wherever you get your books. But people ask about the title. And I'll just share with you that the title is actually drawn from a lyric of a song called Anthem by the late Montreal singer-songwriter Leonard Cohen. And the lyric goes, ring the bells that still can ring, forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. So that duality of light and dark and despair and hope is very much, I think, present in all of the stories in the book. I'm going to ask some questions or take some questions that have come from the group chat. So somebody here is asking about our experiences with different forms of trauma-focused treatment, and whether we've had any experience with things like EMDR or prolonged exposure or cognitive processing therapy. So I'll just answer for myself. I mean, I've been in and out of psychotherapy at different stages in my life, as was my husband. I don't have a medical background or a background in clinical practice, but there are contributors to the book who work in social work, clinical psychology, grief counseling, who have experience with these. I'm wondering if either of you have any experience, or if you have any thoughts about those treatment modalities for trauma.
Well, the treatment I received was pretty basic. I basically just went for regular therapy. I just talked it out. But my luck was that the man who treated me was extremely experienced in dealing with survivors of trauma. So that helped me greatly. So basically that helped me manage my problems. And in addition to writing, and I didn't need to go any further. It was offered to me, various things, but I decided that I was in a good place and I didn't want to go any further with that.
Great, thank you. Jules, anything you want to add? Or
yeah, I remember I started therapy when I was 19, and there were so many challenges. I felt like I was in the role of educator in terms of telling the therapist what is intergenerational trauma, what is residential school. I mean, there's definitely a huge shift now, but there's still, like I said, work to be done. I feel like there's a lot of mistrust in the social service sector for Indigenous people. I feel like the onus is on us as Indigenous people to educate, which is a whole other, journey. So, yeah, I mean, I still, right now I'm seeing a therapist who's, has an awareness of indigeneity and our lived experience. So that makes a huge difference. And then I don't have to spend a lot of time explaining what has happened here. So yeah.
Great. Another question that's come through. This person says, thank you to all of us for sharing our stories. And I would add my thanks to both of you. What do you want your kids, your children, to take away from your stories? And what impact do you think that your stories have had on them so far? You both mentioned being the mother of sons, as I am, of 2 boys. What do both of you have to say about your writing and your art making and narrative telling on your children? Jules, maybe we could start with you. It's a great question.
Yeah, so I've always ensured that my children were part of ceremony. They have a strong sense of identity. They're very rooted in culture. They've been part of my filmmaking process. They've been around the language. My mom's a fluent speaker of Ininimewan. So I feel like my kids, I've given them everything that I possibly can so that they can soar in life, but they're also very aware. They don't have blinders on. Like, they know the reality in which, you know, the world is today for Indigenous people, but they also have very strong roots.
Great. Marina?
Yeah, and I started talking to my children are completely adults now. One is in his late 20s, the other one is in his 30s. So they are not kids anymore. But since they were teenagers, I have talked to them about, that was around the time my first book came out in 2007, my first memoir. I started talking to them. And they have reacted very differently from one another to the story. But I think now that they're adults, I think the effect that it has had is that they are very aware of the evils that exist in the world. You can never call them naive. There is no such thing. They are very rounded people. They are very curious about what goes on in the world, and the turmoils and wars and all sorts of things and revolutions and whatnot. And I have raised them making sure that they know that they don't have to agree with me. And that, I think, for me, in raising kids, is one of the most important things. You don't have to agree with me. We can disagree. And, this freedom that you can disagree with authority is something that I have tried to teach my children. And I think I have been successful because they disagree with me all the time. So there we go.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to take one more question, I think, which I like a lot. Thank you for the person who asked it. It asks, what's next on the horizon for both of you? And I know, Jules, you mentioned a film that you're working on. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that. And Marina, I don't know if you have any projects that you want to talk about outside of your extraordinary teaching commitment to at the University of Toronto. But maybe, Jules, you can tell us a little bit about the film you mentioned called Hope. I think it was the title.
It's called Wapake tomorrow.
Wapake. Yeah.
It's with the National Film Board. It's a feature. We start production in March, and I'm in post-production for my feature scripted film called Broken Angel, which hopefully will be released this year, well, this spring or this fall. And that is about domestic violence, fleeing from domestic violence, but really strong Indigenous women characters who are resilient and matriarchs. So 2 projects.
That's awesome. I'm excited. Marina, how about you?
Yeah, I just finished the draft of a book. It is the story of my grandmother, my paternal grandmother. She escaped the Russian Revolution of 1917. She lost everything, and she started a brand new life in Persia. And she opened this boarding house. So that's her story, and I can't wait to finally get it done and send it to a publisher. And hopefully that will be within a year from now, hopefully.
Does the book have a name, or at least a working
title?
title?
Yes, it does. The Mistress of the Persian Boarding House.
Lovely. Thank you so much for telling us about it. We'll all keep our eyes open and keep an eye out for that.
Thank you.
I see Christian's reappeared, so I think that might mean that our time is drawing to a close. I want to thank both of you on a personal level so much for your generosity. And I think there are some other folks in the audience today who are also part of the book, contributors, writers to the book. So I'd like to thank all of them for being here too. And just tell you all that all of the people who contributed to the book have lovely and brave, courageous hearts. It's difficult to talk about hard things, but we can and we will and we have, and we'll continue to do that. Thanks, Christian.
Absolutely. Thank you, Suzanne, for moderating such an important conversation and for your leadership in co-editing this book. Just so grateful to have your friendship and association with this university. Jules and Marina, also thank you both for sharing your stories, for being so vulnerable with us and giving us the space to learn from you both. Jules, so delighted about your association with your alma mater as well. And thank you to our audience for being with us today and for making that space and time. We are just so delighted that you have tuned in. And something you said, Marina, which I just can't get out of my mind, is that literature can lift the human soul. I think that's such an important message and really gets to the heart of why we do these kinds of book talks. And so thank you for that reminder. So I want all of you to look out for an email from us with a link to this recording, because it certainly does warrant a rewatch, and please do share it with anyone and everyone in your orbit. And of course, for the winner of this book giveaway, we will be in touch with you shortly. As Suzanne mentioned earlier on, you can pick up this book from any independent bookseller or from a larger establishment as well. So please do consider doing so soon. And I just want to wish all of you well. These are tough times, but I know that there is light going forward and ahead, and want to wish everyone well. Take care, everybody. We'll see you at the next book talk coming shortly to you soon. Bye-bye.